Hey guys, it's Olivie Blake, and this is me not writing. Okay, so if you haven't already noticed, this month's spell discussion is up on Tumblr, and I will link it below. So if you'd like to weigh in on Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid, please do. Next month's read is going to be, I'm really excited about this book. I read it a few months ago, and it remains the best book that I've read in 2020, I think. If I Had Your Face by Frances Cha, and it's about basically a group of girls in South Korea, and it really focuses a lot on the female experience and this idea of what is beauty and how does that determine our lives. It's also about class and privilege and about female friendships, and I will say that there are definitely parts of it that are very bleak, but I think that the way that this novel finds hope is actually quite important for this time. And we will definitely get into this in some of the later asks, but it really kind of is about existing in this sort of hopeless situation, and how do you find comfort in that, and how do you find happiness in a world that seems like it's designed for you to feel hopeless. So I think it's very relevant. I'm really, really hoping that you pick this book up and join this discussion, because I have not recovered from this book since I read it. I also could not put it down. I was reading it while I was tying my shoes and stuff, brushing my teeth, just at every moment had to have this book out in front of me. I'm really looking forward to rereading it, and I hope that you will join our discussion. Also, just in case you were wondering, the spell discussions are kind of just open-ended. If you read one of the spell books at a later time and still want to join in, go ahead, because I am more than happy to include your response. If you wanted to send it to me some other way other than Tumblr, go for it. Talking about them at any point, it's just open-ended. A reminder that Clara and the Devil has actually posted in full at this point. We're doing a little Q&A with the characters for fun tomorrow after this video post. So if you'd like to ask the characters anything, please do that on episode 4. But yeah, I am I can't even express to you how much of a privilege it was. It always is a privilege to work with Lukmora, but it's just so good. She just really got everything that I was trying to say with the story. And, this is definitely one of those stories where people have different interpretations of what happened. And so to have someone who could turn that into such a visual, seriously visual masterpiece. The word visually arresting is coming to mind. And I know that sounds very corny to say. She just elevated it so much. It was a story before, and it is a work of art now. So yeah, if you could please read it. We really appreciate your comments. I've mentioned before that this competition is being judged partially based on audience engagement. I hate asking for things. I say this every time, and I really, really do hate it. But in this case, I really, really want her to win this. I can't imagine another outcome, but it is a third dependent on how many people are engaging with us. So please, if you can take some time, it's free. Yeah, you have to have a Webtoons account, but it won't cost you any money. So yeah, that is available to you. But now let's jump into this, because I've got a few things I want to say, and also I have my copy of Alone with You in the Ether, so I'm going to read just a little excerpt. It's going to feel pretty out of context, but that's fine. I turned 20 this year, and I was just really sad that I'm leaving my childhood behind. I know my 20s will be exciting and all, but it's scary as fuck. I don't even know if we have a future. Is this what a midlife crisis is? How were/are your 20s? And did you experience the anxiousness of legitimately becoming an adult? Okay, so there's a lot here. And one of the things that I answered on Tumblr, which was followed up by another person saying that they agree that this is sort of a reflection of what people of this age are kind of going through, is that no, this is not a midlife crisis. This is not even close to a midlife crisis. This is a crisis that is unique to you and your generation, not you specifically, but everyone who is turning 20 and reaching adulthood, your experience is unique. The millennial generation is defined by this belief that if we went to college and we did everything we were told and we took all the AP tests and we did all the SAT prep and we did all the stuff and we got, the safe jobs, those jobs would be available to us when we came of age. And so the millennials that are older than me, they were the ones that hit the first recession. So they got out of college with a ton of debt after having done everything right, to then realize that, oh, there's no jobs. The economy is not good. Also, we can't buy houses the way that our parents did. And we have almost no job security. And this has turned into this idea that millennials don't know how to do anything, which we don't. We were robbed of, home ec and trade classes because instead we were given college prep classes. We were all pointed in this direction towards achievement for nothing. That's why the whole millennial generation just isn't having kids, isn't buying houses, is not contributing to the economy because we literally don't have money because there's no jobs and because we're strapped with debt. Millennials are extremely disillusioned to the point where most millennials, I would say, were intellectually interested in politics, in that we can see that the system is broken and that has failed us, but I don't think there's a lot of activism in my generation. I mean, millennials famously did not come out to vote. This is the thing that's frustrating about Anonymous Ask, is I just have no idea who you are or anything about you. So I'm just gonna have to talk about this from an American point of view, which is the reason the 2016 election turned out the way it did was because there was such an alarming voter apathy from people who are basically my age. We have basically been taught that these systems will not help us. They don't have any interest in helping us. And that is true, but what the world wants is for all of us to feel that we have no control. What the rest of the world and everyone in power wants us to believe right now is that there's nothing we can do, because then that way we will never do anything. This is not the world. The way the world looks now is not the way the world will always look. And these are things that we forget about just in terms of history. I mean, it really was not that long ago that we had a bunch of social services we don't have anymore. We feel that all these things are against us, but they are not that old. The systems that are in place right now are not that old, and that means they can be changed at any time. This is not the world. People in power want you to feel overwhelmed, because the more overwhelmed you are, the more you rely on them to make decisions for you. And they are not making decisions in your best interest. You have power. You have the power to change things and to disrupt them. And things require disruption because they are not working. You are the worst thing that could possibly happen to the generations that hold power now, because things are perfectly fine for them the way they are, and you can only mean change. This is the whole thing about diversity in general. This is why people fear opening the room to women, to people of color, to indigenous people. The more they are disenfranchised, the more they keep certain people in power, right? The more these people feel they lack any voice, the safer it is for the people who are in power to maintain power. The Tumblr asker who followed up with this had mentioned a tweet that went viral about how maybe the world really did end in 2012 and we've been in hell ever since then. That is a Twitter joke that is part of a system that is designed to make you feel that nothing can get better. They do not want you to believe you can make this better. Because the more lethargic you are, you won't get anything done, and that is great news for them. Racism, white supremacy, they have a very targeted attitude, which is that you make everything seem like a joke. So that way you can say, hey, it's a joke, when really it's sinking in. That actual meaning is sinking into people who are going to buy into what that rhetoric actually represents. Do not be fooled. I mean, I'm not saying that exact Twitter user was I'm not saying they're trying to indoctrinate you into white supremacy or anything. I'm just saying that you have to be careful what you consume, because the more it numbs you, the more you feel like you don't have a future, the more you will behave as if you don't have a future. You have to believe that you have a future. You have to believe that your life matters, and you have to behave in a way that means you're going to fight for that future, because otherwise no one is going to fight for you. And I know that is super unfortunate, and I know this is part of the reason I was talking this week about how people always ask me if getting a traditional publishing deal will push me out of fandom or something, or if I'll stop writing fan fiction as a result of success in publishing. And the only thing that would actually push me out of fandom is fandom itself, if I don't feel like I have a place there. And I currently do not feel like I have a place there, because I feel like a lot of fandom right now is clinging to escapism. And one of those little, escapism bubbles is the idea that people are really looking for stories about people who are fated or like soulmates or the Omegaverse and stuff. And I can see why that's appealing. It took me a while, but I do see why this idea that you're fated for something or fated for someone is comforting, because it means that even if you don't feel now like something is out there, there's this sort of reassuring idea that like destiny will take you to your happy ending. But there's a reason that I don't write that. The safety of kind of clinging to that belief may never make you brave enough to chase a better ending. You really have to fight that natural urge to sink into your own sense of helplessness, because it is easier to say this can't be fixed and like fuck it, whatever, than to actually try to do something about it. So the thing about being a teen is part of the process of maturing is learning how you fit in with the rest of the world. A lot of being a teenager is about conformity, because that's how you learn to exist. That's how you learn specifically to coexist, is to kind of follow along with the morals and ethics of your particular society. Your 20s are about remembering what makes you different. Finding your passion is actually extremely crucial, because what you are good at, it kind of naturally what you care about is something you become good at. And what you're good at and what those skills that you have that other people don't have allow you to be sort of like a beacon for other people. Finding your passion and actively working towards it, and having the combination of skill and drive, and that what passion gives you is an endurance that other people don't have. Passion is what allows me to write for 12 hours a day when other people would walk away from the desk. Passion is the thing that moves you. And because it moves you, it's there for a reason. The thing that moves you is pointing you in the direction of what you should be and how you should fit into the world. And you can't make that decision based on what is going to get you any conventional form of success. Because what millennials have already proven is that conventional success isn't real. It's just an illusion. It's a bubble that bursts, and it could burst again. You're not going to be your most powerful self doing something just because it's going to get you the, clout or recognition or whatever. It needs to give you more than that. It needs to give you the feeling that you have found where you fit into the rest of the world. Because once you find that, you are more able to carry this world's burdens. And the people who can carry it and keep going are the ones we're really going to need in the future. I don't know how to tell you this. You need to learn things. You need to just learn, because you can't try to get grades or to get a perfect GPA or whatever. That really isn't going to, it seems like that might take you somewhere in life. And there are some, if you want to be a lawyer or a doctor or whatever, then yeah, you need to pay attention to that sort of thing. But don't achieve just to achieve, because you are achieving things in a world where those achievements maybe won't even mean anything in the future. Those are the things you can let go of. When you're saying that you don't know if you're going to have a future, what I want you to think of that, I want you to turn that on its head just a little and say, I don't know what the future is going to look like. But the truth is that people who are confident in themselves, who are comfortable with the reason they exist, and who can look around at the world and say, that's a problem I can fix, that's a burden I can carry that other people can't, those are the people who are going to be able to change this world. And you really need to think about the fact that, forget how things are supposed to look, because that is based off of an old imaginary view of the world that's not real anymore. Things aren't just going to die out one day. I know climate change is it looks bad. It definitely looks bad, because I've definitely had the argument with, I've asked Mr. Blake before, is it ethically irresponsible to even talk about possibly having children when we would be bringing a child into a world where I can't promise I don't know what's going to be there for them. I really don't. But it's different because you're already here and you have to keep going. And you have to fight through this feeling that it would be easier to stop. And as hard as that is, you really just have to focus on not, when I first turned 20, I couldn't wait. First of all, I couldn't wait to be 21. I couldn't wait to be an adult and be taken seriously. And I think your unfortunate issue is that everything has to be taken seriously at this point. So that's not really a concern you have. And I understand why losing your innocence feels like such a loss, because you're not just losing your own innocence, you're losing the world, the belief that there would be a world for you. That's more than innocence. That's more than childhood. That's safety. You've lost your safe space. So you have to be a safe space for others. And I know that that is hard to imagine what that could possibly look like. But it is crucially important that you spend your life creating a safe space. And what that safe space looks like is kind of going to be up to you. And it's going to really revolve around a lot on what you discover about yourself in your 20s. This is when you're going to find out what you're really good at, what really makes you you. You think that's something that happens in your teens, but not really. Nobody really knows anything until, like, I don't know. I feel like mostly in your mid-20s, you hit this weird period where you kind of discover that who you really are was kind of put on hold by trying to do things right. So really spend this time thinking about the fact that who you are is going to make a very big difference for what you make this world into. Okay. Hi, Olivie. I don't know if you can answer this question, but how do we stop caring so much about what someone thinks of us? In my case, it is clear that the opinion that hangs over my head is the voice of my father and older brother, who already said that one of the biggest disappointments was my academic choices. Can you imagine your life revolving so heavily around the life of someone else you can't control? Anyway, taking a master's in history, and I intend to do a PhD and continue with an academic career. Since I entered college, my relationship with my brother has only become detached, especially because I know that I've become a huge disappointment for him just because I followed my passion. It doesn't have anything to do with that, I promise you. I'm constantly torn between moving on and ignoring, with the notion that I'm living the life I want, but at the same time not wanting to move on, knowing that I am living life with this kind of lack of support seems to have a greater weight than I thought. It really feels like a hole between me and my family and fills me with resentments and anger that I can't ignore. Okay, so first of all, you've achieved great things. You have found your passion. Congratulations. Keep going. I'm not saying you need to ignore what's going on with your family. I do think that you need to acknowledge that what's happening for your family looks different for them than it looks for you. I'm going to go ahead and say that the fact that this is your father and your brother indicates that they just have a really hard time with the fact that they can't control you. That's really upsetting to them. And to understand that, I am drawing my own conclusions, which may or may not be right. And one thing I'm going to recommend, as I always do, is that no one knows how the shoe fits except the person wearing it. But you're probably closer to knowing how the shoe might fit. So I think you need to take a second and put yourself in your brother or your father's shoe and imagine what their discomfort is. Here's a question that the next time if you have this fight or whatever, I would love you to ask this. What does my success take from you? Because I can tell you right now that your success, they would not be lashing out at you like this if they weren't threatened by the fact that you are doing well. And not only that you are doing well, but that you are doing well without them. That is very threatening to them, that you are succeeding without their help. The fact that if you succeed, then that means that you've succeeded without any assistance from them, that is unsettling to the point of debilitating for them, that they have no ownership of what you choose to do in life and you're still doing well. That must be infuriating for them. So I understand why you want their approval. And sometimes because these are the people who are supposed to love you, you're going to always crave their approval. It's just part of who you are. It's just the foundational, all of us have holes left in us by our parents or by our family from the way that we grew up and what we lacked. And so you might always have a little bit of insecurity not getting approval. But I think it's really time to stop and ask yourself why you're not getting their approval and recognize that it has nothing to do with you. It really does not. Because your success should not have any impact on their lives. If anything, they should be happy that you're successful. And the fact that they aren't means that something inside of them is threatened by you. And I think you need to, not that you need to change anything you're doing, but it might help you to interact with them more or to understand why you're not getting the support you want from them when you realize that you are actually in an elevated position over them at this point because you're doing this alone. You're doing it without any support, without their help. And that must be very upsetting to them because clearly they want to have some sort of control over how your life works or in what choices you make. I think the most important thing you can do in terms of ignoring the naysayers is understanding that, like, you want this to be a logical situation, right? You want this to be, you're thinking of this like, I followed my passions, and logically speaking, you guys should be happy for me. But the problem with people, the problem with people is that most situations are emotional and therefore illogical and irrational. And this is very irrational, and that's why you can't make sense of it. That's why you keep feeling like you're hitting you're hitting your head against a brick wall of, I want their support, but also I don't need their support, but I do, and you're going back and forth on it because you're having an emotional reaction to their emotional reaction. So here are some things that you're going to need to do that I can't help you with. One, you're going to have to learn to figure out a way to make your acceptance of yourself more important than their lack of acceptance of you. And I think that that can be easier to do when you recognize that think about the only way that you could gain their approval is if you do what they tell you. And either you're willing to do what they tell you or you're not. They're not asking themselves, what is her success taking away from me? They don't want to ask that question because that would force them to acknowledge that they're just being small and petty. And nobody wants to acknowledge that about themselves. So, your options are either give up your passions, give up the thing that makes your life yours in order to make them happy. Don't do that. Or become okay with the fact that you're not making them happy because you're not willing to submit to what they're asking you to do. And you can't change their minds. They can change their own minds if they ever, maybe you'll one day be able to have like a meaningful conversation where they can acknowledge this to themselves, but probably not. So you have to become okay with the idea that what they want from you is irrational and therefore impossible. And if you can't give it to them, then you have to give it to yourself. They're making you feel bad because they feel bad. So if it helps you to remember that they are much more miserable than you are, that might be something to bear in mind, because they absolutely are, I guarantee it. Okay, well, this is already getting quite long, but I'm going to try anyway. I'm going to read you a little section from Alone with You in the Ether. There's a daisy in here that Mr. Blake picked for me yesterday. So this is just a little excerpt from part 5 from Regan's perspective. So I've talked a little bit about this book over time. So if you've been watching this series for a while, then you probably know about it. But it's essentially about two people, both who have mental disorders. There's Charlotte Regan, who goes by Regan. So Regan is an artist. Aldo is a theoretical mathematician. And this whole book is about their relationship from the day before they meet until where the book ends. The reason I put a love story on the cover is because it is very much about love, and not just about loving each other, but yourself as well. So anyway, without Aldo, Regan felt an uneasiness, a restlessness, something close to recklessness, or perhaps far beyond it. She felt a vibrating sense of blankness, like the buzz of a fluorescent sign. Closed, open, vacancy, no vacancy. She felt like a door swinging open and shut, things coming and going, and she was merely the operator saying, "Hold, please." She sat on the floor of her studio with her dearth of possessions and thought, I should get on a plane. I don't remember how to be without him. Maybe if I ask him nicely, he'll say yes. Part of her thrilled with the idea of an emergency. Yes, an emergency, she thought. That would certainly bring him home. She thought about catching pneumonia. It would be easy. She'd only have to walk outside and stand in the snow for a few minutes until she turned blue. She imagined herself being found, unconscious, the emergency contact being dialed. Poor girl, Aldo sitting with his father and receiving the call, the phone falling from his hand as he shouted to his father, I have to go, I have to, she needs me and I need her. Regan didn't want to die, obviously, nothing that emergent. She just wanted something reasonably compelling, something that would make him think about how precious time was, how every moment of it should be spent at her side, the two of them together. Eventually, though, her capacity for rational thought would return, and she would remind herself that walking into traffic and getting hit by a car, "Ma, so I have to go, she's lying in a hospital bed, and if I lose her now, what will I do? Who will I be?" would be an unpleasant experience, and probably not even worth it. No, maybe it would be worth it, but what kind of sex could she have with a broken leg? Just wait, she told herself. Just wait. Of the things she told herself she would do, returning to the Art Institute was the only one that seemed manageable, largely because she thought she would walk into the armory and see Aldo there, overlaying a hologram of him from her memory onto the empty floor. "Sir, you can't sit there," she'd say in her thoughts, and he would turn to her and say, "Can't I?" And she would say, "Sir, please, this is a museum." And he would take her in his arms, and without hesitation, he would take her standing up, holding her against the wall. He'd fuck her slowly, tormentingly, his eyes never straying from hers. He'd say, "I came to look at art, to marvel at something, and here you are, and so I will." Reality, to her displeasure, left little time for fantasy. Many of her volunteer colleagues remained on vacation along with the tourists, which left Regan with larger groups, more tours, forced to chatter endlessly about this painting or that one. It was monotonous, which it had always been. It was a task she had chosen for the purpose of invoking monotony. That had been comforting to her once, though it was infected now by the bizarre and ill-founded hope that she would look out into the crowd and see Aldo standing there, a puzzled little frown furrowed into his brow. She started giving tours as if he actually was standing there, answering questions she thought he might want to ask. What does this painting show? How is one intended to feel? And what makes this a masterpiece? Why is it this size? Why did they choose to set it off with this lighting? Why this frame? She could feel herself pounding technicalities into her audience, who were largely uninterested. They wanted tidbits, morsels, postcard-sized facts to tell their friends and family, like, "Did you know this artist painted nothing but haystacks for months?" "Karen, did you know this one was addicted to drugs?" "Truly, Jennifer, art is for the ill." Meanwhile, all Regan could think of was Aldo, the things only he would see and only he would miss, the many things she longed to show him. No, Monet didn't paint mundanity just for mundanity's sake, Aldo. It was to show the transience of light, don't you see? He painted wonder. He painted time. She wanted to shout it to dial him right then. Monet, he's obsessed with time too. He just thinks of it like light, like color. Look at these fucking haystacks, Aldo. Who would do this? Who would do this unless they, like you, were trying to grasp the way time passes? To put it in terms they would struggle for a lifetime to understand. She felt different because of him, immensely changed, and therefore it frustrated her that her reflexes were the same. It enraged her that she still observed who was attractive in a crowd, or who, in all likelihood, had a dick worth temporarily considering. Every now and then she felt herself, distressingly, considering that the man who was not so secretly eyeing her across the wine aisle might be an acceptable way to pass the time, to calm the reverberations in her head. She had the same imaginings of herself pulling a nameless man somewhere cloistered and dark, only now she was whispering to him, "You'd better make this good. Don't disappoint me. You have no idea what this cost." Now, in her post-Aldo fantasies, she was the rough one, the artless one. She was the one saying to them, "You'd better make me feel it or this has been a waste of time." Then Aldo would burst in. He'd point a finger at her in disgust. He'd say, I knew it you were. How dare you, Regan?" And she'd chase after him. She'd cling to him, begging forgiveness. He'd push her away, merciless, and even that she would relish, perversely. He'd push and he'd flee, and she, like a half-starved junkie, would only crave him all the more. After a week, her fantasies, grotesque as they were, began to revolve around him leaving her. "Regan, how could you do this? Aldo, please, I'm so sorry. Regan, you disgust me. Aldo, you can't mean that. Regan, you're toxic, you make me sick. Aldo, if you go, what will happen to me?" She wanted to cry, needed compulsively to suffer. Jesus, she thought, you really have a fucking problem. And so she left all her madness out of her phone calls to Aldo. When she talked to him, she tried to make all her words beautiful, sensual, like she was painting for him with only her voice. She didn't tell him the depravity of her imaginings, or the repulsion she felt with them, or with herself. "I miss you," she said, as if missing were sexy. She spun her voice into the image of herself sprawled out on satin bed sheets, legs spread, inviting. She shaped her missing him into something far less ugly than it was. She was lonely, needy, heartsick. It really wasn't cute. I miss you too. I'll be home soon. His missing her was warm, like a golden retriever. I'll be home soon. Once he said that, she could finally relax and sit upright, take off the imaginary silk robe she'd vocally donned, and return to herself in her yoga pants, her cashmere sweater, the enormous socks because fuck, Chicago was cold in the winter. She'd end her little astral projection with a grudging return to corporeality, and then she'd say, Aldo, just send me a picture of your dick or something. And he'd laugh. Regan, I'm starting to feel a little used, he'd say. And she'd smile and ache and imagine him stabbing her heart with a dull pair of scissors. So anyway, Alone with You in the Ether is now available. If you would like to read it, it is quite personal. And I don't really want to say more about it because, I like to think it's just a little slice of something that should stand on its own. So hopefully you enjoy it if you do read it. Yeah. Anyway, I've gone on for more than long enough, so let's all get out of here. This has been me, Olivie Blake, not writing, and I'll see you next week.